People often say, Jesus, he's the good shepherd. Unlike everybody else, if he loses one sheep out of his 100, he would leave that sheep and go and find the one that was lost. We're reading it the wrong way. Any shepherd would go and find the lost sheep. The whole point of Jesus is using this example is he says, what man among you? In other words, anyone with half a brain would do this. Or what woman having 10 coins and losing one? Of course, anyone would do this. And by the way, the coin back then, she wasn't losing a penny. They didn't have paper bills. The coin, I believe a coin could feed a family for a week. And they didn't have small families back then. So, Jesus is using this as an example that everybody would agree with. So we need to be careful that we read things in context and the way they would have been understood then. And then, of course, we've got the doozy in our first reading. St. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, he says, brothers and sisters, we are the circumcision. What does that mean? Circumcision was something they did, centuries back, as a religious practice. And how could that, that's done to an individual boy, baby. How could St. Paul say this of Christians? It wasn't even a Christian practice, it was a Jewish practice. But St. Paul says that we are the circumcision. He's writing to the Philippians, and by this time, we have people coming and disagreeing with St. Paul. They say, it's okay if you get baptized, but you still have to get circumcised. You still have to follow the 613 rules in the law of Moses. And so St. Paul's response is, no, you don't have to get circumcised. We are the circumcision. Circumcision was a sign of the covenant. It was how you brought a baby boy into the covenant. And some people say, no other groups circumcised. That was unique to the Jews. No, it wasn't. The Greeks didn't do it, and the Romans didn't do it, but the other Semitic peoples did it. But they did it as a rite of manhood. So when the boy was a teenager, say, they would circumcise him. The unique thing about the Jews is they did it on the 8th day. They did it right away. Interesting when people say, Catholics, they baptize their babies, when they're infants, and they shouldn't do that. They should wait until they're old enough to make the decision on their own. That doesn't line up with biblical practice. The Jews and the Christians wouldn't wait until you were an adult to bring you into this covenant relationship. You were going to be brought up in this covenant relationship. And so St. Paul is saying, we don't need to be circumcised anymore. That part of the law was a mark that we had fallen from God's grace, that we needed to follow a bunch of laws, because if we didn't, we would fall away. And so we are the circumcision means that we are the sign to the world of this covenant relationship with God. He does say, he says, by the way, for those of you who believe in following the circumcision and all the other laws. He says, I did better than all of you or any of you. He says, I was circumcised on the 8th day. As for being of the race of Israel, I was of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrew parentage. In other words, he could trace his lineage, which was important for another day. As for observance of the law, I was a Pharisee. In other words, I followed all of the laws. As for zeal, I went so far as to persecute the church. In righteousness based on the law, I was blameless. As a Pharisee, they would try to be blameless. So he's, in terms of righteousness, I did that. But then he says, but whatever gains I had, I consider them all as loss because of the supreme good of knowing Jesus Christ, my Lord. Do we settle for something less than knowing Jesus? Do we think of Jesus as being this, oh my gosh, he's the good shepherd. He would leave the 99 and he would go for the one. We've really lowered our standards. We've lowered our standards because we don't really know Jesus. We don't know enough about Jesus to realize that he's calling us to do this as well. And with St. Paul, he's talking to people and saying, you don't have to do all of these things which were there to keep you following the law, because when the law is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, then we can know him, we can imitate him, we can be united with him by God's grace and by our response. And so the challenge to all of us, do we settle for following a few laws? Or, and by the way, and as a society, we've gone so crazy. Our society is so backward in its understanding of God that even what used to be considered basic tenets, we consider this to be some kind of a radical. I'll tell you a quick story. My little sister, this is years ago, she's going to a Bible study. And we were speaking over the phone. She goes, oh, by the way, I started this Bible study. I said, oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. Is it a Catholic Bible study? I figured maybe it was going on in her parish. And she said, oh yeah. I mean, I think it is. I'm pretty sure that the two women who run it, I'm pretty sure that they're Catholic. I mean, they're not fanatics. I mean, it's not like you go to church every Sunday. Oh my gosh! Now, by the way, my sister goes to church every Sunday now. But how far we had fallen where we thought that was fanatical, when it's one of the basic practices of a follower of Jesus. And so when we look at our readings today, am I knowing Jesus? Not knowing about him, not knowing what laws I have to follow, but is my whole life looking at knowing Jesus? And then knowing Jesus, that helps me to understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing and how I'm doing it.